Hello, future doctors. Welcome back to Best Medicine's GCSE AQA Biology lecture series. Today marks the final video of this wonderful, wonderful journey that we have been through together, and we have pretty much finished all of the content that is required for AQA GCSE Biology. We were doing a topic called biodiversity, and we have looked at what biodiversity is and how we can, what are some of the components or factors that can reduce biodiversity. Previously, we have discussed different kinds of pollutions, for example, land pollution, water pollution, air pollution. We've also discussed deforestation, which is a very important factor, not just for exams, but also for decreasing biodiversity. And now we're going to continue with peat. So what is peat? Peat is essentially a material that is made of dead plant matter, which becomes trapped in the ground as it cannot decay. And this is due to the fact that it lives, or it is present in an acidic environment without any oxygen. So there are anaerobic conditions and acidic environment, which means that the decomposers, such as bacteria and fungi, are not able to do their thing. They're not able to work. So because peat is dead plant matter, and plants are made up of biomass, and biomass comes from CO2, right, from photosynthesis, peat sort of serves as a carbon sink, as a store for carbon. Now, peat is dark brown, black, or spongy, and it also retains water well. Now, here's the thing. Because it is made up of dead plant matter, it can be used as a fuel, and it can also be used for horticulture. The reason why it can be used for fuel is because it is made up of carbon, and carbon can be burned, just like trees can be burned. Now, peat takes more than thousands of years to form, at least 1,000 years to form. Now, it is being extracted, especially in the UK, much faster than it can reproduce. And after extraction, due to burning, it releases the carbon that it has stored in the form of CO2, contributing to global warming. The organisms also that depend on the peat are also lost because they lose their habitat and they lose their source of food and all of those other things, resulting in reduced biodiversity. So here's what peat looks like, right? And this is the extraction process of peat, and then eventually this will be burned as fuel, right? Here's some peat being burned. So peat removal or peat extraction is a leading problem that results in loss of biodiversity. Here's a meme for peat. This is the ideal bog. You may not like it, but this is what peat performance looks like. So anyways, so peat, because it's made up of dead plant matter, when you burn it, it releases CO2, so it acts as a carbon store until it is burned. Now, here's the thing. We have been talking about CO2 contributing to global warming all this time, and methane contributing to global warming, and even water vapor is a greenhouse gas, and it contributes to this global warming thing. So what is actually global warming? How does it work? Earlier, we have briefly talked about this, and today, again, we're going to be talking about this in a repeat of earlier information. So how does the CO2 actually result in global warming? What is the mechanism that causes the global temperatures to increase due to the increase of CO2? What is this greenhouse effect? And how does it even work? So let's have a look, right? Do you guys remember what a greenhouse is? A greenhouse essentially is just an area that is used for plant propagation. We've done this previously as well. And it helps keep the inside temperature regulated, usually warmer. So how does the greenhouse trap the heat? Let's have a look, right? So let's make a greenhouse here. Very quickly, this is something that we've already discussed, and you already should be aware of the mechanism by now. Just a repeat of previous information. Here's what occurs, right? What occurs is that you have the sun, right? And the sun is producing infrared radiation. This infrared radiation comes in as short wavelength radiation, right? Short wavelengths, high energy waves. And these short wavelength radiation is able to pass through the glass or the transparent lining of the greenhouse. And it is able to reach all of these plants here. And it is also able to reach all the ground here. Now what happens is that when ground becomes warm, just like anything else becomes warm, it also emits its own infrared radiation, right? Anything that is hot is emitting infrared radiation. Hotter something is, the more infrared radiation it emits. And so the ground becomes warm and it starts emitting infrared radiation. But the radiation that the ground emits is short wavelength, is a long wavelength, right? And so this long wavelength, as soon as it reaches the lining of the greenhouse, this is not allowed to escape, right? Not allowed to escape. It is trapped inside the greenhouse and not allowed to escape. So short wavelength allowed in from the sun, and long wavelength not allowed to escape. And so what happens is that all of this heat keeps on piling up, making the inside of the greenhouse really, really warm. Okay? And that is the mechanism of how a greenhouse is able to raise the temperatures. Now here's the thing, the same effect occurs on a global level, right? Causing global warming. So the same greenhouse effect would occur on the global scale. Here's the Earth, right? Now here's the thing, the Earth has the atmosphere, right? The upper atmosphere. And the atmosphere contains many, many different kinds of gases. So if this is the Earth, we have a lot of gases in the atmosphere. And let's say here's the sun, right? Now the sun is emitting again those infrared radiation that is short wavelength. When infrared radiation short wavelength comes into the Earth, this is not blocked by any of the atmospheric gases. But when Earth becomes warmer, now Earth starts emitting long wavelength radiation in multiple directions. This long wavelength radiation is trapped and not allowed to escape if we have greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, right? So CO2, H2O, CH4, methane, all of these are greenhouse gases and they trap. Okay, they do not prevent the long wavelength radiation from escaping back into space. And because of this, the inside temperature of the Earth increases, okay, on a global level. So let's go ahead and read this in our neat notes. Normally, the greenhouse effect in a greenhouse occurs when short wavelength solar radiation passes through the transparent glass, heating the interior surfaces. And then these surfaces emit long wavelength radiation, which is trapped by the glass, preventing heat from escaping. Now, this trapped heat raises the temperature, and the same thing would occur on Earth as a planet. Instead of the glass ceiling, the thing that is blocking the long waves of infrared are the greenhouse gases, such as CO2 and CH4 and H2O. Now, the more the greenhouse gases, the greater is the absorption of emitted long infrared waves, right? And the more they're not allowed to escape into the space. So greenhouse gases, including CH4, methane, water vapor, as well as carbon dioxide, they help trap essentially the long wavelength radiation. Where does methane come from? We've already discussed this. Remember, methane is natural gas or biogas, and so it actually comes from decomposition and also comes from livestock. So livestock like cows, they produce a lot of methane. However, compared to CO2, this is almost negligible, right? Almost nothing. CO2 is a lot in the atmosphere, and we're constantly producing it because we're constantly burning fuels in factories and cars and so on. Okay, so what are the effects on ecosystem of the greenhouse effect, global warming? And that is quite important. This often comes up on the exam, so we need to know this. How does increase in global temperature affect us? Well, number one, it will change the migration patterns, right? Usually what you would have is hotter climate. For example, birds or other animals will try to migrate to cooler climates, and cooler ones go to hotter, warmer climates, depending on severity. And it can, because it changes the global temperatures, it changes the migration patterns as well. Loss of habitat, for example, due to flooding, melting of ice caps, droughts, etc. Death of species for the same reasons. It can also disturb the mating seasons. For example, you could have mating seasons in colder climates or warmer climates, right? And maybe if there's global warming, there's mating seasons that is occurring earlier than expected, etc. It also it results in changing in distribution of different species. And of course, because you're killing all the species by destroying their habitats, you're reducing biodiversity. Okay? So global warming is a global problem. What do you think would be the solutions for this? Do you know any solutions to help combat global warming? Well, of course, the number one solution that comes to mind is planting more trees, right? Just plant more trees and they will absorb the CO2 from the atmosphere, resulting in lesser greenhouse gases and therefore lesser greenhouse effect. Another would be to switch to better, more renewable alternatives instead of combustion, maybe using solar power as energy, right? And other forms of electricity like hydroelectric power instead of using fossil fuel powered power stations. You can also switch to electric cars instead of having combustion engine cars. And here's the meme. So when someone says that they don't believe in global warming, it'd be a lot cooler if you did, right? Pun intended. Okay, so maintaining and replenishing biodiversity. How can we maintain and replenish biodiversity? Well, of course, number one that comes to mind, and again, this is coming up here again, like I said, this comes up in not just questions, not directly, but also can come in other questions, right? So one way to replenish and maintain biodiversity is to reduce deforestation and encourage reforestation, right? And the way we can do this is by education, by campaigns, government policies, recycling, switching towards alternatives and bans, etc., right? Number two, breeding programs for endangered species. We have two different kinds of ways to preserve endangered species. Number one is called preservation. Number two is called conservation. Preservation is like you're just preserving things. You're not, essentially what you're doing is allowing the natural processes to occur without any human impact, okay? Without any human influence. In day-to-day words, what I mean by this is just leave them alone and don't touch them, right? That's preservation. Conservation is that you actively go and try to preserve them, right? Actively take a lot of measures to make sure that the organisms have habitat and they're able to mate and breed and so on. So preservation is the maintenance of habitats and ecosystems in their existing state. You leave them untouched. While conservation is that you actively conduct and promote careful use and management of natural resources and other things to protect wildlife and plants from being overused and harmed, right? So these include breeding programs, right, rehabilitations of organisms, and so on. Another very popular answer for this particular question, if it shows up on the exam, is reintroduction of field margins and hedgerows. This is very high yield. They like to put this in the questions as well as possibly give you questions in which you're supposed to write hedgerows, introduction as your answer, and so on. So, what are hedgerows? Hedgerows essentially are just a variety of plants that are used to boundary farming areas. Okay, as you can see, we have a lot of these in the UK. If you go to the countryside, we have a lot of hedgerows that divide different farming areas. Now, hedgerows prevent soil erosion, act as windbreakers, provide habitat to many small wildlife. Okay, these are the advantages. Again, they prevent soil erosion, okay, they act as windbreakers, and they provide habitat to many small wildlife. And I think that is one of the most important points. Because if you're providing habitat to many small wildlife, that means that increases biodiversity. And if you remove hedgerows, then that is going to decrease the number of organisms that used to live in those hedgerows, resulting in decreased biodiversity. You know, back in the day, in many farming areas, farmers had removed hedgerows to make a big singular field for planting singular crops. But nowadays, again, they are being reintroduced for the above benefits. Now, again, for AQA, I can't emphasize this enough. For AQA GCSE, peat bogs, hedgerows, right? These are a popular topic. So occasionally they use information related to them in a question. So the more familiar you are with what a peat bog is, what hedgerows are, the more confident you will feel about that question. They can provide data on or before and after, or even directly question you about their knowledge. So for example, I can provide you a data of the length of hedgerows, right, per square kilometer in 1990 versus 2020. And I can say, okay, in 1990, there was lesser hedgerows. In 2020, there are more hedgerows. And then I can ask you, explain why farmers increased the amount of hedgerows over the 30 years. And then you write those points about the benefits of hedgerows. For example, hedgerows help in decreasing soil erosion. They act as windbreakers. They help provide habitat to many small wildlife, right? And you get 3 marks. Easy. So these are some of the tricks that we show you when you take lessons with us for exam practice. So this is just exam practice and tips and tricks that we tell you during exam practice sessions and lessons. And so if you want to book some lessons, just contact us on the WhatsApp link below, okay? Of course, to reduce biodiversity, you can prevent global warming, reduce CO2 emissions. If you reduce carbon dioxide emissions, that means lesser global warming, leading to lesser negative impacts on habitats. For example, lesser melting of polar ice caps, lesser changes in migration patterns, lesser changes in mating seasons, and so on. Recycling resources. The more you recycle, the less you need to extract resources. So, for example, remember, we were extracting resources, for example, by deforestation. So if you already have those resources, you won't have to do deforestation. Also, if you're recycling, it helps conserve energy, for example, fuels, electricity, and so on. And so that decreases the burden on fuels and electricity production and all of those things. Now, the next topic is food security. Again, this is very, very high yield topic. The entire chapter 7 is very high yield and pretty much is going to come up in the entire, in your exam. So food security, very high yield. What is food security? Food security essentially is the availability of food to feed a population, okay? Now, of course, for a growing population that we have nowadays, we want the food to be available at all times, right? And so we have to have food security in our towns, in our cities, in our communities. There's a lot of things that can affect food security, availability of food to feed a population. For example, number 1, population growth. Remember when we were talking about population and increasing population, we were talking about the fact that it affects food security. Well, here is food security. Again, food security is the availability of food. So population growth, of course, if the population increases, that will increase the demand for food. That strains the existing food production systems and resources. Another very, very high yield for AQA GCSEs is overfishing. All the time shows up in the exams, okay? Overfishing is pretty much a very, very popular topic that shows up on the exam. So overfishing, which is done by, and what are some of the ways in which or causes in which we do overfishing? Number 1, unseasonal fishing results in overfishing. Using illegal nets results in overfishing, or just by simply overdoing it. So once you do overfishing, you're just consuming the supply of fish too quickly, then they're able to replenish themselves. Therefore, this is going to result in decreased fish stocks. So you won't be able to have fish to feed the population anymore. If you do unseasonal fishing, if you use illegal nets that have very small holes, or just by simply overdoing fishing. A third thing that would affect the food security is land use changes. Conversion of agricultural land for urban development or industrial use reduces available farmland for food production. Let's say you have a farm, right? And instead of having the farm there, you just go ahead and develop an industry there. Or in some countries, in third world countries, there's something called housing societies that they develop, so urbanized for living. And that is not good because now you have less farmland available and therefore you have lesser food. You might even be dependent on importing different kinds of foods from abroad. Agricultural practices. Methods such as monoculture or intensive farming can deplete soil nutrients and reduce biodiversity, impacting food security. Monoculture means planting just one single type of popular crop, right? So you only have one type of crop and then you don't have all the other ones and you have to import them. Or intensive farming, you're just doing too much farming and you're driving out all the nutrients so that there are no nutrients left for the next cycle, for example. And trade policies. This is very popular. For example, tariffs, trade restrictions, agreements that can affect the availability and affordability of food. For example, you make an agreement that makes food very, very expensive, right? Some imported food very expensive, etc. So basically, when food is expensive to grow, right, due to different agriculture practices or trade policies, or it's just too expensive to buy, then there's lesser options and therefore food insecurity. Okay? So here's a meme. There's plenty of fish in the sea. False. Overfishing has driven fish numbers to dangerously low levels, and climate change will push them even closer to extinction. Okay? Not plenty of fish in the sea, okay? There are plenty of fish in the sea. The fish in the sea. The man catches the same fish a month and a half later. So what are the solutions to this declining fish population especially, right? There could be so many solutions to all the other ones that you can think of, but the more popular one that shows up on the exams is this one, and so overfishing, and so we have to sort of learn how we can avoid this. What is the solution towards overfishing? Let's have a look. Solution to declining fish stocks. Number 1, using fishing quotas. Fishing quotas limit the number and size of fish that can be caught, preventing overfishing, right? You have a particular quota, you have a particular number and size of fish that you can catch. Apart from that, you're not allowed to touch. That's a fishing quota. Also, in the quota, you're also provided a particular timeline. Only you can fish in that time, and you're not allowed to fish out of that time zone. Number 2 is net size. Net size is regulating large net size only to catch mature fish, right? And allow the young fish to survive and grow for next season. Okay? So say no to overfishing, say yes to sustainable fishing. Fishing is okay as long as you're doing it sustainably by having fishing quotas, fishing seasons, and a good standardized net size. Solutions to improve food security, apart from obviously improving fish stocks. So again, sustainable agriculture, right? For example, implementing practices like crop rotation, growing different kinds of crops, organic farming, reduce use of chemicals to maintain soil health and nutrients, right? Also, factory farming livestock and chickens, increasing their numbers and therefore availability. Educating farmers for better soil nutrient preservation and managing resources effectively. Once you educate farmers, they're able to be more productive and produce more food. Using genetically modified crops. Now, genetically modified crops, remember we've done this in biotechnology and genetic engineering, have advantages. For example, they have a higher yield. They are resistant to certain diseases. For example, TMB resistant crops or wind resistant crops and so on. So there are countless solutions that you can think of with your own head as well, and most of them would be accepted, right? Genuine ones. And lastly, we have biotechnology. Now, in biotechnology would also include genetic engineering, but because we've already finished genetic engineering, I'm just going to leave it as is, right? We have done this now 2 times already, using restriction enzyme genetic engineering, for example, training viruses to be able to deliver genes to different cells in the body and treating diseases. That's genetic engineering. Having the insulin gene being put in bacteria and producing insulin, that is genetic engineering, and so on. Well, one other use of biotechnology is that it allows us to be able to produce mycoprotein. What is mycoprotein? Mycoprotein essentially is just a very protein-rich substitute for real protein, which is used by vegetarians and vegans, okay? So it's a protein-rich substitute for real protein, which is mainly used for vegetarians and vegans. Its texture and nutritional value is very similar to real meat. So they try to grow this fake meat to try to get a feeling of the real meat. How do you do this? Basically, there's a fungus. The fungus is called Fusarium. Fusarium is a fungus that is grown on a glucose syrup. Essentially, you ferment this, right? So fermentation, and it produces this particular meat-like product. So mycoprotein is essentially the vegetarian meat that they grow using culturing Fusarium fungi. Here's the thing though, because it's not real meat, it's not going to provide a vegan or a vegetarian with vitamin B12, for example, a very important vitamin. So somebody if somebody watching this is a vegetarian or a vegan, taking vitamin B12 and iron supplements is recommended. Iron especially if you're a female, okay? And yeah, so we get a meme. Meat is so good that even vegans pretend they're eating it. Yeah. Vegan food in America. Here's a vegan meal that tastes like meat using the power of chemicals and preservatives. Wow, it tastes just like real meat and no animals were harmed. Okay, what about vegan food in India? I'm gonna go with this one. Using the powers of spices and herbs, we made this meal taste great, even without the use of meat. Thank you for this meal. Absolute chads. And that marks the end of this wonderful, wonderful journey to make this series, to compile these notes, and to be able to present these lectures to all of you beautiful people. Thank you so much for putting your confidence in me and for showing all the support that you guys have. And yeah, so if you guys have liked this particular series, please, I cannot emphasize this enough, please share, okay? Please share with all of your friends. It's free, right? It's free, so let's just go ahead and share this. Also subscribe, and I cannot, again, because I care for all of my students, especially those who are watching this, please revise, okay? Revise. You have to revise the notes and rewatch the videos a couple of times, get the content stored in your head before you go on to those guided practice sessions. And if you'd like for us to make a series for other subjects, then please let us know, and please subscribe to our Patreon to let us know, okay? And then again, I emphasize again on guided practice. You have to do a lot of guided practice. You have to learn the phrases and the vocabulary that the examiner is looking for you to get those 9s, okay? And for that, you need a tutor. You need a good tutor who has recently been through all of this vocabulary, all of this transition from GCSEs to A-levels to university. So if you are looking for tutors, just send us a message. Our WhatsApp link is present down below this video. And yeah, so thank you also to some of my students. By name, Abhinav, Adam, Tarun, and Philip, who were my GCSE AQA Biology students. Some of them are. And their parents for all the support that they've shown me over the years. And this helped me finish the series. So thank you so much for watching, and happy studying. Bye bye.